Hello, my name is Guy Costin. I'm founder of Dakota, and welcome. Today we're going to be talking video and how do you shoot video for your investment firm. I'm joined by our president, Dan DiDomenico, who's been really the lead on our team for videoing all the different managers we work with. For those of you who don't know us, we've been a third-party marketer since 2006. We raised about $35 billion since that time. About 3 years ago, we really got into embracing videos in a certain way for our investment firms. With COVID and everything that's going on, it's really become more and more important. As you know, you're obviously watching this, you're probably in the investment business. We're a pretty staid and old school business. Video really hasn't been a thing. But not being able to do on-sites, not being able to get face-to-face, not being able to meet, and no one really knows going forward when that's going to change. Shooting video is going to be really important. And just having, basically every 18 months, you probably want to update it. I'm going to walk through with Dan. I'm going to ask him questions on exactly how you should be shooting the video. We have our own studio that you can come and shoot down in Philadelphia, downtown Philadelphia, called Dakota Studios, world-class, state-of-the-art studio. We're also going to have a template printed out for the exact questions that you need to ask to get all the questions answered of a portfolio manager or a team. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dan. So Dan, welcome. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Guy. Thanks for having me.
You got it. So why don't you walk through the beginning? So we're going to do this in sections, naturally. All of these should be 2 to 3 minute videos, right? Short and to the point, but just as if you were sitting across from a portfolio manager in a meeting in an office. That's really what you want to hear. And so why don't you kick it off? I know it's firm description and philosophy. Why don't you kick it off for how an investment firm should start?
And first I would say the feedback that we've been getting from the analysts that have been accessing and watching the videos of the investment managers that we have partnered with has been tremendous. They love the concept of being able to learn about a firm, the strategy, their process, just all the expectations of the strategy itself prior to engaging in that one-to-one conversation with a portfolio manager. And that's the objective, right? Is to be as transparent, bring as much information to the table. So then when you do have that conversation with an analyst and the portfolio manager, it's far more productive because you've already hit on a lot of these key elements. So that first section is important, right? It's so important to center the conversation so the people, the analyst, knows exactly who it is that they're talking to. So from a firm perspective, you want to start with...
So Dan, before you just get going, I know, let's stay on that point for 1 minute, because I think selling people on the value of video is not just to watch video when we can't see you. It's, hey, I have a call scheduled with you. I'd like to watch 6 or 7 videos of Charlie Garland, for instance, who we've done most recently at Hamlin, one of the PMs at Hamlin, going through firm philosophy and overview, going through the team, going through the sell discipline. So they can prep and know who they're dealing with. So video is more effective than a recording, meaning a non-video, so a tape recording. Right. And so the video actually achieves a big time goal of preparing for the meeting to make the meeting actually more valuable.
Exactly, because you're able to cut straight to the questions that you want to get to, right? And there's already this great familiarity. The analysts have actually said to us, wow, it's like I feel like I've already had multiple meetings with you because I'm able to see your face, the way that you otherwise would communicate. You all of a sudden start creating this relationship with the analyst without actually having to be there in person. And by the way, for your portfolio managers, you're saving them time. Right? If the nature of your conversation with them, once you get on a conference call, a Zoom, or once we get back to in person, it's going to be far more meaningful and productive because you're able to get to those key questions because you've already covered so many other elements of the story on the front end.
Got it. Great. Okay. So let's start, firm description philosophy. I'll let you lead it.
So again, you're trying to replicate a meeting or that first due diligence call with an analyst. So you always want to start with and center the conversation around your firm, when it was founded, where you're located, and the history, right? Every firm has a story. This is your chance to talk about how the firm over the years has evolved into the current state and form of the firm. And then you want to start getting into the ownership structure, right? Who are those key people within the organization? How are they incented? How are they motivated? For those key investment professionals that aren't necessarily partners or equity owners in the firm, is there a clear path to partnership? These are the types of things that the analysts are going to want to learn about your firm on the front end so they can start making the conclusions around, all right, the key people, we know they're going to be in that seat for quite a long period of time. There's a clear path to partnership. So we know that those resources are incented and motivated to do a great job because there is obviously a great alignment of interest between those key investment professionals and the underlying clients. While at the same time you're talking about, without having to explicitly say it, how to diversify key person risk at a firm. And then you're going to want to start to talk about your overall philosophy, right? What are those guiding principles of the firm that define who you are and what you do?
That always have to start with, we believe.
Have to start with we
Philosophy
believe.
has to start with, we believe.
Absolutely. Is there some sort of market inefficiency that you believe that you're taking advantage of? And how is that then going to be applied to all the strategies? You need to start and center people with, we believe, and be able to talk very clearly around what your philosophy is and what those key principles are and the value that you're delivering to your potential prospect, your potential investor, through following those key principles.
Gotcha. And so this is video one, which would be firm, description, and philosophy. And by the way, below in this video, you can click a link and you can download the template that we've created where you can go through all of these questions. So we have that for you. So Dan, next, after you get through firm description and philosophy, and we have all the detail, next is talking about the team.
Yeah. So obviously, people that are interested in learning about your firm, that are interested in learning about your strategy, they're going to want to know who are the key people that are executing that strategy. So you want to be very clear, right? How many members of the team are there? Break them down by role. So talk about portfolio managers, talk about their tenure, talk about how long they've been working together. Who are they supported by? The analysts, right? There's going to be various numbers of analysts. Talk about how they're organized and how they're structured, meaning are they oriented by sector coverage, or is it by geography, or is it by other sort of subsectors that you otherwise would define, and how it would be broken out by each individual team member. And then ultimately you want to talk about the various resources at the firm in support of the investment professionals. So it's very key for everyone to understand the overall size of your firm supporting these strategies so they can feel a certain level of comfort knowing if they're going to make a recommendation and they're going to be bringing that recommendation to their operational team to do a review and do their own due diligence, that they have confidence that they're not going to get tripped up somewhere because you're lacking in certain departments.
Right, and one of the great trainers that I had back in the day, I think his name was Keith McDowell. He always said intellectual honesty. So really at the end of the day, when you're talking with the team and how they work, we know it's not 100% of the time because you don't have a camera over someone, but basically 80 to 90% of the time, how they work, that's really what you want to be describing in the video. And so people get really good comfort for how that team interacts on a daily basis.
Correct.
So next, so remember, this template is in the link below with all of these questions. So now, Dan, product description would be video number 3.
Correct. So you want to start off with an overview of the strategy. What is it, right? What is it that we're talking about? Far too often, and I've sat in plenty of those meetings where the investment manager will just start diving in and start getting into the weeds and details very quickly without centering the conversation so people understand what exactly is it that we're here to talk about. So start off with a detailed overview of the strategy. Then you want to start to get into some of those key details that people are going to need to know on the front end, which is, how do I access the strategy? How do I invest? Right? So start talking about the different vehicles to access that strategy that you're about to talk about.
So then the analyst can then start thinking, right? If they have a mutual fund, they'll start thinking where it would fit. If it's just a separate account, it might fit differently. If it's an LP, it would fit differently.
Exactly. So you're leading them to those conclusions and starting to think about, how is it that I can use this strategy across my various clients? Because that's going to obviously be a big deciding factor on the relevancy of that strategy for the analyst, for that allocator that you're talking to. And you want to talk about the key differences, right? So each strategy, or each vehicle, I should say, may have different parameters around it. So discuss what those parameters, what those differences may be. Minimums, fees, what are the assets in each of those vehicles? So again, how applicable it is to the person that you're talking to. With that kind of information, they can very quickly get to what it is that they need to know in terms of thinking about their underlying clients and how they're going to be able to use the strategy. And then you also want to talk about capacity, right? That's always a key question, and more relevant for different asset classes for sure, especially as you go down cap into more small cap strategies, mid cap for sure. You want to make sure that on the front end, you're being very, very clear and transparent around capacity. Where are you today in assets? And even talk about the history of those assets in the strategy and how you've gotten to this point. Everyone likes to know about the trends that you're seeing for the strategy and the adoption of the strategy. While at the same time, then you're going to want to talk about the limitations in terms of liquidity, being able to execute the strategy, and you want to be very honest about that on the front end.
I can already feel that how better prepared an analyst would be having watched videos like this prior to a meeting. Right? You can kind of feel it, because then they can start to position in their own mind as they're talking to you. They're kind of through some of the basics. Then they can get into the meat, kind of where they want to take the conversation.
Exactly. And look, they may have some internal requirements, right? So if you don't meet certain asset minimums, you're going to want to talk about the length of track record, the length of track record by vehicle itself. Those are some other gating issues that you want to address on the front end. And look, everybody likes to invest alongside like-minded allocators. So talk about your underlying client base. Describe them. Who are they? Right? Some of it's going to be somewhat obvious in terms of the breakdown between mutual fund and separate accounts, but not always the case, right? So you want to be able to describe who are your underlying clients, from those that will be more institutional to those that may be serviced through the intermediary channel. So think RIAs, multifamily offices, certain platforms and banks, right? Because everybody is going to have different means to access those strategies. Custody of assets, where are you available, right? If you can get to that kind of information, then they know that if you're already available on a certain platform, if you're already meeting those minimum requirements around track record and asset class, you're giving green lights along the way for that analyst to want to proceed and do more work on your firm and strategy.
Great. And so remember, this template with these questions is in the link below. And so Dan, as we move on, now we're getting into video number 4, which is investment process and portfolio construction. Oh, and by the way, just want to point out to the listeners, this is when you're doing these interviews, and if you do in our studio, we can coach you. But you want another portfolio manager, another analyst, or your head of sales to be asking the questions in an interview type process where the portfolio manager is answering these questions. And we have all the questions laid out in the document in the link below in this video. So Dan, start to interrupt, investment process and portfolio construction.
So we'll start with the investment process, and this should be where the passion starts to come out in the interview with the portfolio manager, talking about their day-to-day, right? So if you think about the process, certain key things that you're going to get to right away is going to be, what is your edge? What makes you different? So trying to articulate very early on here in this video, this segment of the video, what competitively would you say set you apart from others that would manage a similar strategy, right? So that may come down to the process, right? And just being able to define how it is that you manage your strategy. Are you more focused on the top-down macro analysis in setting up and driving performance, or is it more about the bottom-up fundamental security selection, right? There's no right or wrong answer. What you want to be able to do, though, is make sure that you're connecting with the person watching your video to exactly how it is that you go about managing this product, this strategy. So you're going to then start to talk about idea generation, right? Start defining what your addressable universe may look like. So what is that universe of stocks or bonds or whatever your strategy may be? What's that pool of investable assets for you to be drawing from? Where are ideas being generated? How are they being sourced? Are you doing front-end screens? So is there some combination of quantitative upfront screening in combination with the qualitative? Right? This is where you really want to start getting into the key details of the process so people can understand, is it repeatable, or is this a process that listening and going through it is going to be a little bit more dependent on more of the macro environment.
So as you can see, and listening to Dan going through what you want to be producing in your videos, most of our meetings for us in the investment industry will be first-time meetings. And so naturally, if you can be better prepared for a first-time meeting, it's such a better use of a portfolio manager's time to have them watch this information ahead of time. So during the meeting can be so much richer and more productive, and you're not repeating all the same stuff. Now you might have to touch on it, but that group will have seen it before the call. So it just makes, I look at it in terms of respect for portfolio manager's time. This 10X's that, having really great video.
And you're respecting the time of the allocator.
Naturally.
Right? That analyst who has to author a write-up, a recommendation, right? You're doing a lot of that work for that person on the front end. So we like to think about it as well as trying to save time for the analyst, for that allocator, where you know what, it may not be a fit, and that's okay. But you saved the allocator time and you saved your portfolio manager time, right, and not having to come to that conclusion together after an hour-long call.
Right.
So it's all part of the qualification process.
Fantastic. All right, moving on to video number 4. Like we said, I know if you're just joining, our template is in this, clicking the link below in the video. Dan, portfolio characteristics and going through. And remember, all of these answers are brought out through Q&A with the head of sales, another portfolio manager, another analyst, reading the questions to where the portfolio manager or analyst will respond to the question. So if you do it in our studio, like we said, we'll choreograph it for you. But if you're doing it on your own, you can use our notes and you can ask questions. So Dan, portfolio characteristics.
Yeah, so this is the segment, very important, where you're going to be setting the expectations around the risk and return profile of your strategy. So you want to talk about your objective, right? What are you trying to achieve in terms of either absolute or relative returns? And that could be on a risk basis as well. So thinking about it in terms of, we're trying to achieve a certain level of return with a certain level of risk. So there's a number of different ways, obviously, that you're going to describe. This is going to help the key allocator and analyst start to think about how to use your strategy, right? So this is where you want to be extremely, extremely honest about performance expectations, especially as you start to think about and talk about performance in different market environments. So first, let's start with the return expectations more on an absolute level, independent of the market. And you want to talk about what are those targets over a certain period of time. So what's your time horizon that you believe would be the most appropriate to evaluate the strategy and the performance? Next, what you're going to get into is you're going to start thinking about, well, what are some of those ways in which you are managing risk, right? So within portfolio composition, you're going to want to talk about what are those limitations that maybe you've applied to manage risk. That could be on a sector basis, that could be number of holdings, that could be market cap and size, that could be how you think about geographic exposures. And that could be either absolute levels, so putting more self-imposed limits on each of those, or that could be relative to a benchmark. And again, this is giving the listener, the person that's learning about your strategy, a way by which you think about the strategy itself and how the underlying exposures are either going to be more agnostic to a benchmark, or if they're going to be far more aware to the benchmark that they believe is most appropriate, so best fit, that they believe you should have certain parameters then plus or minus within certain bounds and ranges against that benchmark.
Gotcha. Great. And ironically, as I'm listening to Dan, who's an absolute professional, this video also serves, as we're talking about video, this is actually pretty good coaching for face-to-face meetings as well. I'm learning a few things myself. So Dan, to close, as we're talking about risk management in the final video, now we're not saying that this has to be necessarily the only set of videos you do, because you could even chop these up into more even individual videos, right? Based upon, there's a lot here that we've done, so you can get 10 to 12 videos out of all this content. So to close, talk about the risk management video.
So risk management, obviously I talked about it a little bit more explicitly around some of those self-imposed limits that you'd have in portfolio construction, from sector limits or number of positions. It could be market cap or geographic exposure. But risk management, you should discuss it, how it's thought about and applied across the entire firm and strategy. So think about, how are you maintaining and securing those key investment professionals, right? Think about the alignment of interest of those key investment professionals to your underlying clients. Think about how risk management could also be applied to decision making. Is it a CIO or is it a team-based model where there's a shared collaborative decision making? That's a form of risk management. You should also be talking about your sell discipline. That's a key way that people like to hear you talk about how you think about risk within the portfolio and how it's handled in reaction to certain triggers or events within the portfolio. And then ultimately, what that's helping to define is within the return expectations. If I'm going to take that important next step and allocate my client assets and figuring out what the fit is within a portfolio, I want to understand what the underlying client experience might be, right? So what would be the potential up capture expectations? And more importantly, what's going to be that down capture experience, right? Because we all want to understand, what are these strategies intended to do in what types of market environments. It's rare that you would expect in certain conversations for your strategy to perform optimally in every market environment. But the more that you can spend time on the front end, understanding and defining what those risks are and how they're mitigated within the portfolio, that's going to give that allocator more confidence to bring into the portfolio, because they know they might have a complement within their overall asset allocation program to offset a certain market environment that may not be ideal for your strategy.
And really what you're saying is educating the buyer beforehand. How can I expect it to perform given different market environments? Number one. Number two, what role do you play in my portfolio, right? So you're setting the expectations from a risk standpoint up front. And I think that's a fantastic, this video is a fantastic video to address those, because that'll definitely lead to Q&A in the face-to-face meeting.
Absolutely. And the more specific that you can be to call out certain time periods, we all know, and it's still fresh in our minds, 2008, 2009. Think about the drawdown in Q4 2018. Think about the drawdown that we just witnessed in the first quarter of 2020. Being able to talk about the experience of the fund, the strategies, how the portfolio managers adjusted the portfolio, and being able to call those out as illustrations to the process in combination with then what the result was in the portfolio. Again, you're giving that allocator a much clearer sense of the role of your strategy in their portfolio.
Great. Well, Dan, extremely helpful to you. So that wraps it up. So as you know, down below the link in this video are the templates for all the Q&A and all the sections that we went through. I think we covered 6 to 7 sections. Those can be sliced up into 10, 12, 14 different videos. You can make them as short as long as you want. It's very easy. You can simply sit down across from the PM. If you do it in our office like we have today, you get the option of having 2 video cameras, and then our videographer can slice it together and create 10 to 12 wonderful videos to prepare analysts before a call to get to know your portfolio manager and your investment strategy. So thank you for listening. Dan, thanks for your time.
Thank you. Anytime.
You got it. We'll see you soon. Thanks.